Hi everyone, I have just finished Simply Love by Mary Balogh. This is the second book in the Simply Quartet, and it was a lot more compelling than the first book. I actually found myself a lot more engaged with this story than the last. Something I forgot to mention in my previous video was that for those of you who are fans of the Bedouin saga, the Simply Quartet follows the story of Freya Bedouin's former governess. If you have read her book, Freya's book that is, you will remember that it was mentioned to a certain degree. Simply focuses on the story of the school that Freya's former governess, Miss Martin, owns. Freya herself is Miss Martin's secret benefactor, as it happens. For those of you who love the Bedouins, there's a lot of them in this story. In fact, they're somewhat central to the story. The love match is actually sponsored by them, sort of. Haven't mentioned that. Let's get into the spoiler section, as there's a few ideas that I wanted to share with you guys. So let's get started. This story follows Anne and Sid. She is Joshua's cousin. Joshua is Freya's husband. She's also a teacher at Miss Martin's school, just like Frances from the previous story. She has a 9-year-old son that was the result of abuse by Joshua's late brother, as it happens. Sid is a former soldier who was captured by the French military and tortured. He is missing an eye and an arm. Sid is also the Duke of Bewcastle's steward. Bewcastle is Freya's brother, and that's their connection. Joshua invites Anne to spend some time with them in Wales, where Sid works for the Duke. She agrees, as her son has very few male friends or male influences in his life. As she gets there, she runs into Sid after having fled from him, shocked by his injuries and apologizing. Sid and Anne grow fond of one another, as they had a lot in common, and since everyone else was paired, they naturally gravitated towards each other. Their friendship ultimately leads to trust, which leads them to share and spend an intimate afternoon. Anne becomes pregnant from it and reaches out to Sid, who decides to marry her. They navigate several difficulties in their first few weeks of marriage, and the story ends with them finally admitting they love one another after a party full of Bedouins. Now, there are several ideas that were very interestingly explored in this story, and I would say that this was one of those books where sex was the most central, but in the form of passionate lovemaking. It was about touch, intimate touch. Sid is a victim of torture who had to get his arm amputated and does not have one eye. Even Anne, during their first meeting, flees in shock and horror at the sight of him, even though she eventually realizes her mistake and apologizes. He had to endure touch, the kind that destroys and hurts, the kind of touch that traumatizes one to dread any form of touch, hence. Sid feels repulsive and horrific, incomplete and inadequate, unworthy of love, and incapable of making someone else happy. Sid longs and craves touch, but at the same time he is terrified of it, and as such, he actively avoids it, especially intimate touch. He says something rather interesting at some point, that I think describes trauma wonderfully, even if it's not physical injury. It's as if his body is stuck in the past to such a degree that it can't deal with the present. It made me think of all the symptoms that we experience that are, in fact, echoes of previous trauma we've come in contact with, all their hurts or wounds. Our bodies register every form of event and every touch that comes with them. The loving, creative ones, the affectionate ones, but also the traumatic ones, and these are the ones that are difficult to forget and overcome. Sid lost his right arm, which is the one he used to paint. He loved to paint, which was, interestingly, how he felt he could express his vision of the world. He saw the world in a certain manner, and then had the ability to physically express that through painting. His loss was so great that even the smell of paint made him nauseous. Now, interestingly, it's not that he was a mess. He actually was quite functional, but complacently incomplete. But not because he was physically incomplete, but because he kept himself so by refusing to face his past. It wasn't until he received Anne's affectionate and accepting touch that he did not start his transformation, that he did not gather the strength to revisit his past and grab whatever he needed from there and leave whatever he did not need any longer and invent himself anew. Anne, on the other hand, had been the victim of abuse, and she was obviously terrified of intimate touch. She could not bear the sensation. She could not bear feeling intimately touched, and this created a lot of confusion for the two of them. and, as you would imagine, it would feed Sid's fear of being repulsive because of her reactions to him when they were in bed. It was the touch that brought her right back into the moment, when the most tender form of contact became the most destructive. She would freeze and he would blame himself and his own injuries. Sometimes, fate puts us in a specific situation where we find ourselves surrounded by the right kind of people, with the right kind of information to share with us, information that will speak to our inner fears or traumatic experiences, information that has the potential to heal or make us whole again. But if we're not honestly open in these situations, if we're not at least partially aware of how our own experiences can determine our behavior, we may validate both our and their programs. We may end up revalidating the wrong perception of reality that trauma creates in anyone, for ourselves and perhaps for someone that we love. It struck me that we either make one another strong or weak unintentionally and unconsciously, depending on our level of awareness. There are some of us for whom helping someone else is second nature, and I think responding to a request for help is key. But that should go along with a certain amount of internal work, and that is a separate conversation. So I will just simply say that internal work is probably the other half of helping someone become strong. The idea of attractiveness is also explored in the story. They actually both felt repulsive for different reasons. Anne felt dirty and Sid knew he horrified others. But it's not just being physically attractive to strangers. It's being found worthy of attention and affection, worthy of touch. Loving and creative touch. Our skin is the first level of defense that we have to the outside world. It's the one organ that we will cover or reveal to show our trust. It's the one organ that will visually display our wounds, sickness, habits, and life history in general. It's in our wrinkles that people can tell whether we smile a lot or frown too much, etc. It's so crucial, yet so fragile, and easy to break and cut. However, it is also very effective at transmitting a lot of unspoken words to the rest of our beings. Sid was tortured, and as such, he felt he had lost his way to give himself to the world. Anne was abused, and as such, she felt unworthy of love and affection and afraid of intimacy. But it wasn't until Anne touched Sid and told him he was beautiful, and after she opened up to him about what touch meant, that they could not rewrite the information that their skin had imprinted in their minds. I know it's a long video already, so perhaps it may be better described this way. This book was the story of how intimate touch can be utterly destructive, and we have all been there in one way or another, but it is through the same avenue, that is, touch, contact, that we may regain our lives back by rewriting what all those awful touches left imprinted in our skins, imprints that dig to our very souls in some instances. And it's a monumental task. But it's on the other side of that task that life is found. And that's that. Thank you guys so much for watching. If you enjoyed this video, make sure you click like, and you can click subscribe, and you can share this with your friends. Thank you so much, and I'll see you guys next time. Bye.